Tonight's speaker is Paula Marshman, and she is a natural resource planner and a long-time Duanesburg resident. And her topic is landscape of our ancestors. So let's welcome Paula. Thank you.
A warm night, so thank you all for coming out on such a steamy night. When I first picked this day, I thought, it's going to be a little cooler. But no. So this is a topic that I've thought about for a long time, and because of my background in physical geography and geomorphology, I really wanted to kind of try to figure out what our ancestors saw and really try to explain to you what we can see now in our environment. And I think Duanesburg is among some of the most beautiful places, and I will attempt to show you that this evening. I'd like to imagine what our ancestors experienced and what we see now. This is a reminder of what our roads used to look like, and there was planks on some of the major thoroughfares. Here's a farm field looking like the clouds rise out of the land at times. A day like today is perfect to see this phenomenon, and I really enjoy seeing that. So this is looking north, and I'm starting here with this saying, as old as the hills saying. And we can see north, I've got a better picture of this, but north to the foothills of the Adirondacks from I-88. And the best spots for viewing are where the Schoharie Valley opens up to the north. This is the same picture, but a little clearer. And again, if you're in the mood for checking out the Adirondacks someday, drive along I-88, Route 30, Gage Road, and Burton Hill Road. You can get a good view. Okay, I think I'm going to not do the laser clicker, but Great Sacandaga Lake lies to the right of just to the right of the dip that you see most to the right. And again, here are the foothills of the Adirondacks from Sheldon Hill Road. So the Adirondacks are among the oldest geologic areas on Earth, and the bedrock is traced to the Canadian or Laurentian Shield. And a couple summers ago, I got a chance to be up on the Laurentian Shield, and I knew this was exciting for somebody like me. So it was really, really excellent. It's an area that the bedrock is right at the surface of the land. There's not much topsoil at all. Here we're drawing in a little closer, and we see the Esperance Hill with the Adirondacks to the right of that. Again, here's the Esperance Hill from Route 30 as we move towards Oak Hill Road, heading down Route 30. This is an area that's always really intrigued me. We're looking at the Taconics right now from I-88. I always have a co-pilot with you to take a picture if you're in that mood because of the traffic. But it's really some of the best pictures, views that we see of the Taconic Range. So again, this is looking east from Churches Road before you snake down. The Taconics underwent 3 land building events. They're called the Grenville, the Taconic, and the Acadian mountain building events. And each time, the mountains wore down. And it's really hard to even imagine now how tall these mountains once were. And so I'll get into that a little bit later. Here you see Mount Greylock on the right, which is the highest mountain in Massachusetts. I couldn't get a picture of this, but Jiminy Peak is the curved feature to the right of Greylock. And then Route 2, over to the left, kind of in that notch there, heads over the mountain from North Adams. Great dive. And then the sharper peak on the left is Vermont. So here's Greylock up close. So the tectonics were once as high as the Himalayas. Over an immense period of time, the mountains eroded with an outwash to the east and another to the west. So at one time, the ocean actually lapped against where this mountain range was. So again, this went to the west as well. So the west outwash is called the Catskill Delta, and it moved over 300 miles to the west. So that's a lot of material that eroded away. So again, this is looking towards the Berkshires, which is part of the tectonics from one of our ridges. So this is the beginning of our landscape. When I studied landforms 50 years ago, plate tectonics were not even part of the geomorphology textbooks, even though we had read a little bit about plate tectonics from the late 1960s, but still in the 70s it still wasn't part of the geomorphology textbooks, and how important plate tectonics were in crashing and then creating faults as well. So moving our view as we move south, you can see just barely what I call the Three Sisters. And I know this drives people crazy because I don't even know if they're called the Three Sisters, but I have called them the Three Sisters for many, many years. So here's a better shot of the Three Sisters. And you can see the mountains from Route 4 in East Greenbush as well. I was there for another meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, wow, those are the same mountains we see from Duanesburg, but a different view. And then pivoting north, one can see the roll boom nose as it dips down to the Mohawk in Schenectady. And I'll explain more about the roll boom as we get to that. Again, here are the Three Sisters from Mudge Road. From east to west, or left to right, I always talk in terms of east, west, north, and south. Acre Point is the furthest left, and that's 3,100 feet. Next is Burnt Knob, which is 3,180 feet. And then finally, Windham Mountain at 3,524 feet. So here's a better shot of the Three Sisters. I think I had to expand my camera setting. But imagine seeing these mountains from a long time ago. And I don't know how many people are familiar with seeing them in the distance, but maybe didn't know what they were. So imagine our ancestors seeing them and using them as markers, like today's road signs. And this is Acra Mountain up close. As we move closer, the Helderberg Escarpment is one of our most prominent landforms. It forms the end of the Appalachian Plateau, and it's the base of what we call the hill towns. I like this road marker. It means Helderbergs mean clear mountains, and interestingly, the Helderbergs has long been called the key to geology of North America. Here again is the Helderberg Escarpment. The Helderbergs, and of course that's where Thatcher Park is. The Helderbergs are geologically younger than Duanesburg by approximately 200 million years, which is interesting to even think about. And I always had a hard time as I got into the geologic eras, what a million years looks like, geologically, and the erosion that takes place during that time. And this is another view of the escarpment as you head down Pangburn Road to Route 7. I wanted to get up close and personal to the escarpment, but I just ran out of time. So this is a view of the hill towns from Barton Hill Road looking south. So the Palatine Road, which is roughly today's routes 146 and 156, was the Palatine Road which carried settlers through the hill towns to the Schoharie Valley where they settled. So this was a surprise to me. About a year ago, we stumbled upon I've long known about the Duanesburg Creek in the town of New Scotland, but the folding of the rocks, I think my mouth was just open for at least 5 minutes, because you just don't see folded rocks around here. So these indicate that great pressure must have happened when the plates collided, forcing the uplift of the Helderberg Mountains. And then turning around, we see the Duanesburg Creek looking northwest. Coming back up on the hills, here's looking towards the Bosanquille Valley on Settles Hill, which we really had a treat last month to hear all about Settles Hill. So that's looking south. Now we start to complete the circle of landforms that are in our backyard. Here's Darby Hill, Barton Hill, and beyond. Did that advance?
Yes.
Okay. Here's a clear view of Darby, Sheldon, and Barton Hills. So now we're beginning our journey into the Schoharie Valley and the Cobleskill Valley. And this is, of course, is Terrace Mountain. Geologically, the landforms are much younger than Duanesburg by about 70 million years. And they are found in the upper to middle Devonian time period. And believe me, I had never, really investigated the time periods before I started this project. So it's been very interesting to me to be able to discern these. So we again find Terrace Mountain to the left. Here's a view of Cobleskill Valley along Route 30, taken from Route 30. The smaller rise in the background may be Shank Mountain, and it's all part of the Appalachian Plateau, which is a dissected landscape. So one of the most interesting features is this flat-top mountain called Berg Zuri. And it rises up to 1,811 feet. It was shaped by glacial, erosional, and karst processes. Again, in Duanesburg, we do not have any karst underground except as you head toward the hill towns. So you can access area by Route 10 and Route 7, and there are no formal trails to get here. So here's Berg Zuri from Route 30 as you look toward Sharon. This was formed during the Appalachian building event, so much younger than the town of Duanesburg. And this mountain is also called Carker Mountain. The indigenous name is Oalas Solus by the Mohawks or the Haudenosaunee. The significant landmark is also visible from Route 7 before Quaker Street. And the area around it drew mostly German settlers. You can see I really like this landform. So this is part of the Catskill Plateau, known again for its karst topography and caves. And Berg Zuri is made of limestone. And the cave complex reaches all the way down to Howe's Cave. This significant landform is one most of us are familiar with in Schoharie Valley. Of course, it's Roman's Nose. Roman's Nose stands at 1,240 feet, and it's also known as Sky Island, which is understandable because it reaches toward the sky. It was a Revolutionary War landmark serving as a strategic lookout for patriots. The lower fort is just below Roman's Nose. And that's a shot of the Schoharie Valley. before you round the bend to get to Roman's Nose. This is a fossil area on Rickards Road. And it's evidence that a warm inland sea once occupied this location. I never knew that before. But all these little rocks, you can see fossils in them. It's amazing. This fuzzy picture of fossils is from the Devonian time period, approximately 250 million years ago. And this is an example of a trilobite fossil, where you see the shell-like feature. And from Rickards Road, this is looking west into the Schoharie Valley. So drawing him even closer to Duanesburg, we see Barton Hill looking south. The ridges where the sky meets the land here. So the Depot Road quarry site really piqued my interest in the formation of our very distinct, beautiful ridges. Notice the layering that happens over millions of years. Keep skipping ahead. Here's the quarry site with snow and ice highlighting the rock ledges. Here's a stream making its way off a ridge. Emblematic of our ridges, where do the ridges come from? And also, I want you to, next time you drive west, just past Pine Grove Farm, and I'm sure you appreciate this, but just to take in the valley and the ridges, I just think it's stunning. So some of the oldest lands in our town are from the Ordovician era, some 450 million years ago. The big snowmelt this year cut a new creek, and I had always assumed our ridges were formed only from water movement, and down, such as the Normanskill as it kept going down in size. So back to the erosion of the tectonic mountains over the course of 400 plus million years ago and the flow of the Catskill Delta, I am convinced now that our landforms were developed from deposition and then continual erosion and glacial melt impacts flowing down toward the Mohawk River. And I have a graphic that shows that. Again, here's our Catskill Delta as it was moving across New York State. The steep ridges are always found on the south side, even as one goes up in elevation. If you find one on the north side, please let me know. And here's another ridgeline. You can see it very clearly when the leaves are off the trees, how flat and then steep these ridges are. Yesterday's stone walls are hidden in new forest growth on one of the ridges here. Here we're looking north. And here's a ridge with relatively new growth. So this is a favorite representation of mine, showing the lobes of the glacier. And it's look at the Mohawk lobe as it pushes down, and that would have affected our topography here, and Lake Albany and Lake Schoharie. Here's Loch Nine in the wintertime and the crushing ice, but this is just a fraction of what the glaciers look like at 1 to 2 miles thick. Here's a topo map showing the delineation of ridges. sweeping eastward. Can you see how these ridges all kind of sweep up? They sweep northeastward, flowing towards the Mohawk River. I feel that they found the Plotterkill eventually and came down what I know as the roll boom. If anybody else has heard of a different name for this, but I worked with a fellow from GER&D years and years ago named Almi Kagashel, and the Plotterkill Preserve is the memorial. It's a memorial to him as well because he was so instrumental in the Plotterkill Preserve. But this is a roll boom from Van Branken Avenue, which is another nose in the Mohawk Valley. So at this point, the Plotterkill cascades down several falls into the Mohawk River. Here's a roll boom on the Mohawk River. I'm not sure, this is a picture I found. I think it's a picture, an early picture of the steam engine, but I wanted to start addressing how the land was cleared by our ancestors, and this includes our agricultural heritage. And it's note the size of the open fields that we just don't see today. And this is looking in, let me see, about northwest into Delanson. Again, amazing to see the open fields. And I think we've seen this before for the rail yard in Delanson, but I want to show the huge barn at the top of the hill, which is on Thousand Acre Road. It's huge. And this is a view of the Schoharie Valley. Again, note the open fields. And then finally, the Esperance Covered Bridge. Oh, we have another shot of Delanson. Again, note the open fields. The Schwarm side of my family was at the top, the very top, and I think that where Charles Street curves around, I think that was the old blacksmith shop that my grandfather had. So when the cows come home, when the cows come home, it's a sight we rarely see now, but we grew up with. I like to show the barns, because they're fast disappearing. I know that farmers today will say the barns of old just don't have, uses anymore. But they just provide such a key into who we are or where we came from. This is a barn in Mariahville, off the Mariahville Scotch Church Road. I keep skipping ahead, my apologies. I always like the hearts over the door. And here's a barn complex in Minaville. The barn, and then it was in the process of being torn down and the wood removed. I understand it was being moved out and reconstructed in Ohio. I don't know why we let our historic resources go like that. This is the old schoolhouse in Minaville. This is a barn just outside of Esperance, near the Esperance Cemetery. It keeps weakening over time. And finally, here is the Pine Grove barn, and then the old chicken coop, which is really showing its age as well. This is part of the old town map showing rudimentary topography markings. That they just aren't that curvy. But it's fun to see them against current topography maps. So here's again remnants of our agricultural heritage as we travel into Burtonsville, looking across the Schoharie to the town of Duanesburg. Keeping the fields mowed increases diversity and encourages agricultural uses. Imagine what it must have been like for our ancestors to cut the wood, remove the stumps, and then farm those fields. Incredible. On the right is the shagbark hickory, making up the historic oak hickory tree community in our area. You're finding less and less hickories these days, more maples, and of course birches come in as the first of the successional species. And then on the left is my favorite, is the shad bush. And it's the first flowering tree seen in April. If you look closely, you can still see the shad bush in the edge environments of the highway and the woods. And I'm going to tell you the story of the shad bush now. So I always knew them because there were shadfish bakes along Hudson River communities when I worked for the coastal program. And so the indigenous people named this bush the shad bush because it's when the migratory shad started running up the Hudson River. And then our ancestors called it the serviceberry tree. And of course, we're removed from the Hudson River here a little bit, but the serviceberry signaled when it started blooming in April that it was now time that the dead could be buried after a long winter. And so it signaled that the ground was now thawed enough so we could bury the dead and have the services. We've got lots of ponds now in the area, and this is just one with a ridge going up. And here's a landscape shot, southeast, showing, probably in the town of Florida, but showing Duanesburg. So farm fields are becoming overgrown, and one of the blame factors, if you will, was the reforestation program, which was begun by the soil and water conservation folks in the 1960s. And the trees are dying off. Just they were the wrong types of trees to be planted here, mostly pines and spruces. And now they're just dying off. They've reached the end of their life. We're looking south to the Cobeskill Valley, I believe. This is one shot I wasn't really certain, but I think we're up on near Landis. Here's Old Route 20, bridge abutment over the Normanskill near the Duanesburg Crossroads. I never knew it was there. Did you, Skip? And there you see old mill remains out of Middleburg. An old stone wall in the burn area. In fact, I found out, that one of my ancestors was a builder of stone walls. This, again, is Charles Street in Delanson, and the old blacksmith shop is to the left, and the old chicken coop still remains. And again, it's a very fond site for me because that was my grandfather's blacksmith shop. Here the deer are looking for a tasty morsel, especially this year. Wetlands seem to be growing in size, especially since I was a kid. Notice the beaver house on the left. See it way to the left. So we have 4 primary watersheds in town: the Normanskill, the Bosankill, the South Chuctanunda, and the Schoharie Creek. What is pictured here is the wetland of the Normanskill along the 1,000-acre road. Here it's the beginnings of the Normanskill in Delanson, and its source is Darby Hill, Barton Road area. I haven't found the exact location, but I will. And the Normanskill is 45 miles as it meanders along. Here's the Normanskill on Depot Road. Originally called Northman's Creek by a Norwegian settler who had settled in the lower hollow called Kenwood in Albany County. So it flows into the Hudson River just south of today's Port of Albany, and it used to be called Castle Island. Here's the old grist mill along the Normanskill, and it was depicted by a local artist, Harriet McTaggart. So the mill is no longer standing, but the bridge is. Today, looking in the same direction with the old iron bridge still intact. The creek travels from Duanesburg through Princetown, part of Rotterdam, Guilderland, and the city of Albany. Here's the Bosankill just before the climb. The Bosankill means raging stream. Here's the Bosankill Falls and the Bosankill Preserve. Here's the Bosankill with the blooming of the shad bush in the distance. The Bosey joins the Normanskill at the Watervliet Reservoir, which was built in 1915 for the city of Watervliet, as well as it's now used by the town of Guilderland. And this was something I did not know. It was stocked with bass and pike by DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation. Here is the South Chuctanunda Creek traveling through Duanesburg and Florida. The headwaters are Mariahville and Featherstone Hall Lakes. The drainage divide between the Chuctanunda and the Normanskill is on Churches Road. And then I also included that the North Chuctanunda, of course, flows down through Montgomery County and powered the mills in the city of Amsterdam. So the drainage divide, this is the Schoharie Creek. So this is all the western creeks after about Gage Road flow into the Schoharie. This shot was taken at Junction Road. So again, Gage Road is the approximate drainage divide, or if you reach the top of Route 20 at the highest point, that shows you where the drainage changes from the Normanskill to the Schoharie. Here's the Schoharie Creek at Village Hall on the left, and then Priddle Road on the right. So this is the largest water course that we can claim as our own, kind of, and it forms the entire western boundary of the town of Duanesburg. So drawing in even closer, again, we see the mill pond, where you see that black dot just to the right. That's about where the iron bridge was that I showed you. So this is on the Normanskill. Again, this is the South Chuctanunda Creek, where the old mill stood at Green's Corners. And you can kind of see the foundation of the old mill at this location. And this is the old mill that once stood just off of Churches Road. And that's another shot of it. Here's the old bridge abutment in Burtonsville that once went over the Schoharie Creek. Now the last part of my program deals with the lakes. And we have Featherston Hall Lake first, which was once called Mariah Lake. And it's a state-regulated wetland. I'm not sure if the whole thing is. I don't see how it could be. But it's approximately 39 acres. So I don't have any pictures of Duane Lake, but I think I could have copied one from what I saw earlier tonight, which is 116 acres and is 3/4 of a mile long. It was created in the 1920s. So this is George Featherston Hawes' mansion, which overlooked Mariah Lake. And interestingly enough, he was the state's first geologist. This is a painting by Thomas Cole, who he brought up from, who is famous for the Hudson River School of Landscape Painters. And he came up and stayed, I think, for a winter at George Featherston Hawes' mansion. And I thought, look at the mountains. There's the three mountains again. And here's Lake Mariah, which is now Featherston Hall Lake. This is Mariahville Lake, which was dammed in 1793, and it was originally called Mariah Pond. It's 201 acres and 1.5 miles long. This is the wet area east of the upper reservoir. If anybody can get to the upper reservoir, let me know how you get to it. But this is right along Mudge Road. Right along Mudge Road. And here we have the lower reservoir, which we call the Delanson Reservoir. And then finally, this is becoming a common sight now. Just saw a bald eagle last week, and I've got quite a story about the eagle. They were reintroduced late in the 1970s by the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I actually worked in the Bureau of Wildlife at the time when the first eaglets were brought from Alaska to the Montezuma wetland area. So after all these years, they're becoming such a common sight here. So, and then finally, this is my final shot. Thank you all for coming, and I want to give a big shout out to Bart, who helped me so much with a lot of this, and taking pictures. And when I say stop, he stops the car, and just really thank you so much for coming. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, I live in Mariahville, and my father always said that Mariahville is part of the Upper Hellbergs. Is that true?
The Upper Mariahville Lake? No.
The Hellbergs. Because we have all those rolling hills. We can't be the Adirondacks because we're on the south side of the river.
I think the Upper Helderberg Incarnate is called it.
Yeah, the Helderberg Escarpment is to the south. You remember those three sisters?
Right.
Yeah. And
so what are all the rolling hills then that come through kind of the way for north to the river?
Okay, so from what I can figure out, they came from the erosion of the tectonics. Through 3 mountain building episodes, they just kept laying down stone. Remember that picture of the quarry on Depot Road? And all I can think of is that it was built up over time, and then of course the glacier, it has to be factored in that it round away a little bit, and the glacier was coming in it wasn't coming straight south, it was coming more at an angle, from the northeast.
So we're not the Upper Hellbergs?
No.
Okay. So the weathermen who only talk about Knox are correct. Knox is the Hellberg.
Yes, Knox is in the town of Hellbergs. And also, I wanted to mention, I apologize for those of you who live further south of Duane Lake. And I think you start getting into more of the karst topography, which is indicative of the karst topography and the Appalachian Plateau. But I need to research that more.
I have a question about what you just said, and now I have two questions. What do you mean when you say karst?
Karst is limestone. So when water infiltrates, it will create caves.
And the question I had was about the tableland that you see driving west on 20 on the distance. I've always heard that, and it's called Bounce Erie. Now, what you said...
Bounce Erie?
Spell what it was that you said.
B-A-R-A-C-K. It might be B-A-R-R-A-C-K. Z-O-U-R-I-E.
Could you start again? I'm sorry.
B-A-R-R-A-C-K Z-O-U-R-I-E.
Okay, thank
Anybody else? Thank you.